the Vigilantes. Danny Randall issued his orders as a general would. First, he sent warning word to Cal Marsh, still nursing his shoulder. Through one of his barkeepers, he caused to be called to his presence 4 men. 3 of them were miners, the 4th a lookout at the Empire. He met them in his little room quite openly, which, as I have explained, was in accordance with his usual custom. He detailed the exact situation in a few words. "Now," he ended, "we get busy. Are you in?" Each assented with apparent deep satisfaction. "Now," said he briskly, "Monroe, you go to the lower trail, near the big oak at the second crossing. Wait there. If the express messengers have not passed by tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, return here. If they do come by, stop them and tell them to proceed by the cutoff to the place they know of, and to wait there for me. Understand?" To each of the other 4 men he assigned a different watching on other trails, giving them the same instructions. "Now get," he finished. After informing Yank of my projected absence, I waited at the appointed place until the appointed time, then returned to the Bella Union. "That's all right," Danny greeted my report. "They came across the Hog's Back and are now safely in hiding. Here." He gave me a slip of paper. "During the day contrive to see these men. Make it casual and easy, as though you just happened to see them. Chat a few minutes and tell them this. Danny Randall calls a secret miners' meeting at the Upper Horse Flat at 9 o'clock tonight. Slip up there without being seen. Be sure to let them understand that it is I who am issuing the call. Get them to tell you whether they will or will not come." I took the slip of paper and read over the half-dozen names it contained. They were all known to me, so I nodded my comprehension and went out. All the rest of the day I loafed about, chatting with dozens of people, among others with Morton himself. That individual professed great zeal for law and order, and told of the wonderful things he, as sheriff, intended to accomplish. Among the lot I contrived to include the 6 men whose names were on my paper, and to deliver my message. I explained as far as I knew, and got from each a definite and emphatic promise to be present. "It's time this thing was brought to a head," said one man. "If Danny Randall is taking hold of it, I enlist." I returned to report these facts, received an indifferent nod, and, under further instruction, went quietly to camp to await the agreed hour. We started up the trail about 8 o'clock. Yank insisted that he was going if he had to roll all the way, but after a little we simultaneously remembered that the Morenas had owned horses. One of these I caught, and on it Yank rode to the place of rendezvous. The night was very black. After we had entered the woods, its darkness seemed at first to hang in front of my eyes like a filmy curtain, so that I fairly groped as one would when blindfolded. In the open, a faint starlight helped us, but after we had entered the pines, we had to fairly proceed by instinct. I remember feeling a shock of surprise once, when we skirted the river, at seeing plainly the whiteness of the rapids, as though the waters were giving off a light of their own. Straight overhead were scattered patches of stars, with misty abysses of blackness between them. Only after an interval did I appreciate that these apparent abysses were in reality the tops of trees. We felt our way slowly, the soft muzzle of the horse at my shoulder. Gradually our pupils expanded to the utmost, so that we caught ghostly intimations of gray rocks, of dust patches, or seized the loom of a tree or the opening of a forest aisle. Luckily, the trail was well marked. We had only to stick to it. At the flat rock, we were halted by a low-voiced command. I gave the password as instructed by Danny Randall. This experience was once repeated a little farther on. Then, as we neared the upper horse flat, we were stopped by a man who flashed a dark lantern in our faces, scrutinized us for a moment, shut off his light, and told us to go forward. We found a small fire behind a screen of firs, and around or near it the figures of a dozen men. They stood silent and scattered a little apart from the firelight. We could not make out their features. From time to time other men came in, singly or in couples, until probably 25 were gathered. Then ensued a few moments of waiting. A sudden stir proclaimed fresh arrivals, and 4 newcomers strolled briskly to the fire. As the light fell on them, I recognized Randall and the 3 express riders. Danny kicked together the fire until it flared. "Somebody put more wood on this," he said in his natural voice. "We've got to see each other." In a moment the flames were leaping. I looked about me with considerable interest to see who of the camp had been summoned. I must confess to a few surprises, such as the gambler from the Empire. But in general, the gathering consisted of those whom I should have characterized as solid citizens. Barnes, the hotel keeper, Himmelwright, and men of his stripe. They were all armed and all very grave and sober. Danny ran his eye over us one by one. "Meeting come to order," he commanded briskly. "This is a vigilante meeting. I hope you all realize what that means. There are just 30 of us here, and Morton's gang is probably 100 strong when it is all together. We cannot fight them, but we can give the honest, decent men of this camp a chance to fight them. I myself believe the honest men will back us, and am willing to risk it. If any of you who are here now think differently, say so." He paused, but no one spoke up. "If anybody doesn't want to go into this, now is the time to back out. Just keep your mouth shut, that is all." He paused again, but again no one moved. "That's all right," observed Danny with satisfaction. He lifted a paper. "Listen to this. We the undersigned agree, as we are decent men, to stand by each other to the last, to avenge the death of any one of us, and to obey the orders of our leaders. And if we fail in this, may God deny us mercy." "Boys," said Danny Randall earnestly, "this is serious. If we start this now, we've got to see it through. We are not much on Bible oaths, any one of us, but we must promise." Frank Monroe stepped forward. I obeyed. The little man stared up into my eyes, and I will freely confess that never have I experienced quite the queer sensation it gave me. Danny Randall had become not only formidable, but great. He seemed to see through into the back of my mind. I braced myself as though to resist some strong physical force. "Do you, Frank Monroe, subscribe to this document as a man of honor, so help you God?" he demanded. "I do," I answered solemnly, and affixed my signature below that of Danny Randall. And queerly enough, as I stepped aside, I felt somehow that I had assisted at something sacred. One by one, Danny Randall called us forward and administered his simple oath. The fire leaped, and with it, the mighty shadows. Outside the circle of light, the tall pines and fir trees watched us like a multitude standing witness. The men's faces were grave. There was about the roughest of them something noble, reflected from the earnest spirit of justice. Randall had the plans all made, and he detailed them rapidly. We were to arrest 4 men only, and he named them: Morton, Scarface Charlie, who had recovered, a gambler named Catlin, and Jules, the proprietor of the Empire. "Crawford is back in town," said someone. "Make it 5 then," said Danny instantly. We had a long discussion over all this. Many other names were suggested. Danny agreed that they were those of men guilty of the worst crimes, but maintained that the first thing to do was to get hold of the real leaders, the brains and motive power of the gang. The 5 first designated filled that description. "Can we really prove anything against them?" asked someone. "No," said Danny instantly, "we cannot. Does anyone here think any of them guiltless? Consult your consciences, gentlemen. I agree with you that it is a fearful thing to take a man's life. Vote carefully. Consult your consciences." We balloted at last on each name separately, and the 5 leaders were condemned to death. Next came up the vital questions of ways and means. Many were in favor of a night surprise and an immediate hanging before the desperados could be organized for defense. Danny had a hard time showing them good reasons against this course, but at last he succeeded. This must be done deliberately and publicly, he maintained. Otherwise, it fails of its effect. We've got to show the gang that the camp is against them, and that won't be done by hanging some of them secretly. Suppose the camp doesn't back us up? Queried a miner. Remember your oath, gentlemen, was Danny's only reply to this. It was decided at last that 5 committees should be appointed to arrest each of the 5 men, that the prisoners should be confined in a certain isolated log cabin, and that the execution should take place in broad daylight. There remained only to apportion the committees. This was done, and at about 2 or 3 o'clock, we quietly dispersed. I was instructed to cooperate with 3 of the miners in the arrest of Catlin. With the members of my committee, I returned to our own camp, there to await the appointed hour of 7. This had been selected for several reasons. It was daylight, the roughs would be at home, and the community, although afoot, would not yet have gone to work. While waiting, we cooked ourselves some hot coffee and made some flapjacks. The chill, gray time of day had come, the period of low vitality, and we shivered with the cold and with excitement. Nobody had much to say. We waited grimly for the time to pass. At about 6 o'clock, Yank arose, seized his long rifle, and departed for the log cabin that had been designated as the jail. His lameness had prevented him from being appointed on one of the arresting committees, but he had no intention of being left out. Half-hour later, we followed him into town. It was a heavenly fall morning of the sort that only mountain California can produce. The camp was beginning to awaken to its normal activity. I remember wondering vaguely how it could be so calm and unconcerned. My heart was beating violently, and I had to clench my teeth tight to keep them from chattering. This was not fear, but a high tension of excitement. As we strolled past the Bella Union, with what appearance of nonchalance we could muster, Danny Randall nodded at us from the doorway. By this we knew that Catlin was to be found at his own place.